To flatter a despot is not an art, but to disagree with him in a polite manner, to put on him the reins of reason without him realizing it, that is an art, for which he will thank us afterwards. So, for example, one won't eradicate the voluptuous drive. One should not even weaken it very much, but one should only let it borrow the proper attractions from virtue. Immanuel Kant. For 2 lectures already, I discussed what Kant has to say about states' right. The right, the law, the justice in a state. I explained that to Kant the point of a state is to secure and guarantee people's rights and thereby their freedom and the peace between them. I said that the point of the state is to give the people their property, and indeed the state is giving it in a sense, not simply confirming, not simply securing it, but in a sense giving it, distributing it, because if there was no state, if there were no laws, you could not have any property in the true sense. You could claim something as yours, but there would be no security, no guarantee that other people will respect this claim of yours. Only within the state, which gives to each his own, which secures the property, can there be true property. And I also discussed the punishments that, according to Kant, the state should give out to those who break the laws, who don't respect others' property. But of course, there can be different types of states. This I already discussed in the lecture on what is justice, where I said that to Kant, the proper state, the republic, the rational state, should have 3 elements, namely freedom, law, and force. But I said there can also be situations or conditions where at least one of those elements is missing. You can have anarchy, where you have freedom and you have the law, but there is no force enforcing that law. Or you can have despotism, where you have law and you have force, but you have no freedom, because the law is not a law that restricts freedom only as much as is necessary in order to secure it, but rather the law is more restrictive and oppressive than necessary. Or you can have barbarism, where you have only force, no freedom and no law, not even a despotic law, but rather where might makes right, and where the strong arbitrarily and through mere violence rule the weak. Now, since this is the case, since a state is not automatically good and just, there rises a question that is very important for states, right? Some, especially nowadays, might consider it the most important question in the realm of states, right? The most important problem it has to solve, and that is, how exactly should the state be run? Who should be in charge of the state? How should that work? How do we make sure that the state is indeed a just republic and does not turn despotic, for example? And this is something I want to start discussing now. I will discuss it not just in this lecture. This will take several lectures. But I want to start discussing this. Kant has a lot to say about what is a republic as opposed to a despotic state, and he has things to say about the division of powers too. But first, here, I want to introduce an important distinction Kant makes, and that is the distinction between ruling and governing. And I find this is a great distinction that he makes, and also one that is important within his thinking, that is helpful to understand a lot of what Kant has to say, and not just in the area of right. But unfortunately, it is a distinction that seems to escape most people. Usually, you will not find it discussed. You will probably be hard pressed finding any other video on Kant on YouTube discussing this distinction. I mean, if there is one, you can point me to it. I would be interested in knowing. But even though there are lots of videos about Kant, I'm surely not the only one talking about Kant on YouTube. This distinction between ruling and governing is usually not discussed here. But even in more scholarly circles, it is discussed rarely. And even people who certainly have read their fair share of Kant and who might think about political matters a lot, even those people usually tend to not discuss this particular division. So, for example, I'm thinking of Hannah Arendt, who, after all, considered herself a political thinker and who was influenced by Kant and frequently mentions Kant. And this division between ruling and governing that Kant makes, I think, could have been very interesting to her, because it actually fits with quite a few things that she discusses in relation to other political thought, the political thought of the Greeks or of Montesquieu or whatever. And yet still, I am not aware of her ever mentioning it, of her ever picking up this distinction that Kant makes. So it seems that this is something that escapes lots of people. Indeed, Kant he doesn't discuss it prominently in one specific case, but rather this is more something that is mentioned in many places and many remarks scattered throughout all of his writing. So I guess it's easy to overlook it, but you shouldn't overlook it because it's quite important. So what does this distinction mean? Well, Kant says that the ruler is the sovereign in the state. What exactly the sovereign is, I will discuss in my next lecture. For here, it's enough to know the sovereign by Kant is defined as the overlord, the one who has the final authority, so to say. And most importantly, he is the lawmaker. He is the one who gives the state the laws. It could be a king in a monarchy, and that was usually the case in Kant's days. But in an aristocracy, it would be the Senate, he says, and in a democracy, it would be the people. So the role of this sovereign could be filled by different persons, but always the sovereign, the ruler, is the one finally in charge, is the one who gives the laws. And the government, on the other hand, should not be identical with this sovereign, with this lawgiver. Here we come to the division of powers that I will further discuss in the next lecture. But rather, the government is made up of the executive. The government is made up of the ministries and is probably headed by, Kant calls him the governor or the regent. would be the head of government, that is appointed by the king, by the sovereign. So in Kant's times, when the sovereign was usually a king, the head of government would then probably be the prime minister, or the chancellor, or the grand vizier, or however you want to call him. And Kant says that the ruling consists of sort of saying where you want to go, giving a certain direction, while the governing consists on executing the, you could say, order of the ruler, consists of actually enacting what was ruled. And Kant says that the ruling can happen according to fancies, according to moods, according to whims. It doesn't need to be very rational. You don't need to think through if you're the ruler. You can just give commands. But the governing, that has to happen according to laws, and therefore in a rational manner. Because I already gave an earlier lecture on what is reason, but reason is lawfulness to Kant. Reason is not arbitrary, reason thinks in principles. And Kant gives a number of examples or analogies that might be helpful to better understand the distinction between ruling and governing. Sure, within the state, as I said, the ruler is the sovereign, the lawgiver, so the one who directly, or maybe through representatives, as in the case of our democracies, has the legislative power, while the governing would be done by, well, the government, by the ministers and so on. But Kant says this distinction can also happen in other areas. So he says in a so-called theocracy, the ruler would be God, but the government would be the priests, right? We may call it theocracy. The claim might be that not man but God rule this state. But no matter whether you look at the ancient kingdom of Judah, or if you look at current day Iran, the day-to-day governing and administration is certainly not done by God, but rather it is the priesthood, it is the ayatollahs that are in charge. Likewise, Kant says on a ship, the ruler is the captain, but the government, that would be the helmsman. And also another example Kant gives is a household, where he says the woman, the wife, should rule, but the man, the husband, should govern. Of course, Kant is not thinking of a modern relationship, of a modern marriage, but rather of how it was in his own day, a typical, let's say, bourgeois household. And here he says the woman would be ideally the ruler and the man would be the governor. And finally, Kant gives the example of the individual human being, where he says the senses rule, but the thinking faculty, the intellect, the reason, should govern. So maybe these examples and analogies are helpful. Once again, ruling, which can happen to according to arbitrary whims and fancies, ruling gives the direction, but governing has to execute and enact it. Right? So on the ship, the captain can say, we want to sail to America now, or we want to sail to India now. But now it is the helmsman that has to actually set the course and to command the various sailors on the ships, to put each man to his task, so that the ship actually reaches the destination that the captain determined. And likewise in the theocracy, God may give the laws, like the Mosaic laws that he gave to the Jews, but it is now the task of the priests, or then later the rabbis, to interpret that law, to actually apply that law to everyday questions, to actually solve conflicts where maybe it's not immediately obvious what the law wants from you, right? Like, especially in modern days, they had to think about stuff like, okay, there's the law that we have to keep the Sabbath, we mustn't work on the Sabbath. That's why we said you cannot make fire on the Sabbath. But now we have electricity, so what about turning on the light with a switch? Is that considered making a fire? Those are questions that the priests, as the governors, have to deal with. Just like in the state, the sovereign could say, for example, I want education for my people. I want the people in this country to be educated. But now it would be the task of the government, like the Ministry of Education, to make sure that there are schools everywhere, that children are actually sent to the schools, to find teachers and to train the teachers in order to teach, and to devise curricula and so on. Right, that's not what the sovereign himself would do, but rather that would be the task of the governing, which is executing this command of the ruler. Or take the household. The woman, as the ruler, might say, I want new earrings, I want a new necklace, or she may say, I want help in the household, we need a new cook, or we need a maid. And then the husband will have to find the right thing, and the husband will have to make sure he earns the money in order to be able to pay that. And by the way, Kant also mentions that not only in the household is the woman the ruler and the husband the governor, but he says that since ruling does not require necessarily reason, rather ruling can happen according to fancies. You're just giving commands and then others have to execute them. That is also why women can even rule the state and be accepted as rulers. And indeed, if you think about it, there were female rulers in Kant's day, right, in the 18th century. Austria, and therefore, since back then the Austrians were also the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, therefore Germany as a whole had an empress, Maria Theresia. And also in Muscovy, you had empresses, the Empress Elizabeth, the Empress Catherine the Great, and no one really had an issue with that. It's not that all the men rebelled against following and serving a woman. And if you think about it, this might seem strange because I can think of female rulers in that time, and not just in that time, also in earlier times, right? In the Middle Ages or even in antiquity, there have always been female rulers, but I would be hard pressed to think of a female minister or a female chancellor or vizier or whatever. And this might seem strange at first because naively you could think, well, isn't the monarch the higher, the more important position? So if people think that a woman can do that, then why shouldn't a woman be able to fill in one of the lower positions to be a minister? But maybe it is that the people, even if they didn't reflect about it as much as Kant and didn't reach the same level of clarity as Kant, that the people, at least unconsciously, made a similar distinction as Kant makes, the distinction between ruling and governing, and therefore were of the opinion that if, as they thought, women are maybe less rational, that does not make them incapable of ruling and therefore being the head of state, but it does maybe make them incapable of governing and therefore being the head of government. But anyways, as to the last analogy, the individual, here too, you can see that the senses rule. So again, ruling happens according to fancies, doesn't have to be rational. So the senses just demand, they just desire certain things. They may desire food, or they may desire sex, or whatever. But now Kant says reason reason should govern, which is to say that the reason has to think about how to execute this desire of the senses, how to actually enact this ruling. And this can happen in all three manners, right? That I discussed in previous lectures, like my lecture on the imperatives. To Kant, there are these three kinds of imperatives. Reason gives us the ones of skill, the ones of prudence, the ones of morality. So skill would be how to achieve any given goal. So if my senses say we want food, then I have to use my reason to cook so it doesn't burn, right? Or if the senses say we want sex, then maybe I can use my reason in flirting. I can try to be skillful about how to chat up a woman. And second, there's prudence, which to Kant is always about not reaching any given goal, but rather reaching the highest goal that we have by nature, the goal of happiness. So you are prudent if you think of your own benefit, and also not just a singular, but the overall, the long-term benefit, right? So the senses may demand food or may demand sex, and reason, however, will say probably, well, it would be most prudent to eat something healthy, to eat something that isn't bad for us, or it would be most prudent to not just have sex with a stranger without protection and maybe catch something. but rather to be protected, right? So again, the senses are ruling. It's not that reason is going against it, that reason is saying, no, you don't get food or you don't get sex. It's just that the reason governs this command and executes it in not just a skillful but also a prudent manner. And lastly, of course, reason also gives imperatives of morality. So sure, the senses can demand food, but reason would probably say, but we mustn't steal it. Or the senses can demand sex, but reason would probably say, but we mustn't rape. So always it is the senses ruling, the senses desiring a certain thing, having an urge for something, but it is always, or at least it should be, reason which governs and which is tasked with how exactly to go about this. And that is always the difference here. Kant says at some point that the ruler inspires the government. And this formulation, this wording that he uses there, makes me think of another part of his philosophy of art and the genius. I've already given a lecture that you can check out about what is the genius artist. But to put it briefly, genius to Kant is mostly original spirit, as he says. So the genius artist is he who doesn't just copy others. He's not just a skillful artist who is good at copying the technique of someone else, but rather the true genius artist creates something truly original. And here we can speak of inspiration, right? I mean, the very word genius comes from genius, from the Latin word for spirit, and also the word inspiration, right? It's literally being inspired. So a spirit coming into me, that is the old idea behind that word, and giving me a certain idea. But Kant would also say that the art cannot just be genius, just be original, because originality could also be grotesque, right? It could also be original in the sense of going against all good taste, maybe even coming close to insanity, because insanity too, as Kant would say, is in a sense original. So Kant says it is the task of the artist to also give his artwork a tasteful form. And taste to Kant, which is simply the aesthetical power of judgment, taste is the ability to choose that which is not just liked by me in particular, but rather which is liked by everyone. So I have good taste when I can choose something that others will find nice, will find tasteful too. So while Kant himself never mentions his distinction between ruling and governing applying to the artist also, the artist is not amongst the examples he gives for rulership and government. I think we can very well apply it here, and that it can help us to better understand what he has to say about the artist too. You could say that the artist's genius, so in the sense this spirit that he has by nature, that nature gifted him with, inspires him, gives him original ideas, and therefore he is the ruler. He decides what sort of artwork is produced. But the artist, with his good taste, should govern the genius and govern the ideas that his own genius gives him, and give them a tasteful form. So you could say, with an overview of all these examples, you could say that always it is the ruler who is responsible for the material, so for the content, the what happens, what is done, but it is always the governor who is responsible for the form. So how is it done? Which form do we give to this matter? And this distinction between material and form is a very important one in philosophy in general. You cannot really get into philosophy if you don't learn to, in your thinking, always very clearly distinguish between matter and form. But it is also very important for Kant's philosophy in particular. And I already said in several previous lectures that to Kant, the matter, the content, usually comes from the senses, while the form is given by the thinking. Indeed, thinking is nothing but connecting, nothing but form giving. And this, once again, fits well with how he characterizes rulership and government, right? Again, rulership is done through fancies, through moods, so it can come from the senses. It does not require thinking. But government is done according to laws, so it does require reason, which is the faculty of principles. So yes, all thinking is form giving, and indeed, so is governing. Governing gives the commandments, the orders of the ruler, a certain rational form. Now, for Kant, governing is much more important than ruling. Governing is the true art in politics. For one, the art of governing is, of course, about how to best enact and execute the command of the ruler. Right? It's easy for the king to say, "Oh, I want to declare a war on the neighboring country. I want to conquer it." But now it is the task of his ministers, like the minister of war, like the finance minister, and it is the task of his generals to recruit soldiers, to build a fleet, to finance the whole thing, to devise a strategy, and so on. But that's not everything. The government should not simply be the willing executioner of the ruler, Kant says. Rather, it is also, and maybe more importantly, the task of the government to balance out the ruler and to prevent harm that might come from certain rulings. Because Kant would say that it is not so important to have a good ruler. Can't hurt to have a good ruler, but a good government can balance out a bad ruler. While on the other hand, if you have the best ruler in the world, but you have a bad government, that's a bigger issue. Because, again, ruling can be based simply on whims and moods. So the ruler can be very arbitrary, can be very whimsical, can today he can give a command that maybe tomorrow he already forgot again, and tomorrow he gives a new command, and the commands are not necessarily good or rational commands, and they may even contradict each other, because maybe the ruler does not think through what he truly wants, right? So a king in a state can say, "Oh, I want a big fleet, build me a big fleet," but at the same time he commands he wants a new palace, and maybe there's not enough money for both. Or in the individual, the senses may desire something unhealthy. Maybe they want to indulge in drugs. But I mean, the senses probably also desire to not live under a bridge, to have a proper home. So um, if today I get blackout drunk and then I oversleep and I don't go to work, maybe I lose my job and then I lose my home and I would be homeless. And that's not what the senses actually want. So the two different desires of the senses to get drunk and to have a home, they are at odds with one another here. And so it falls to the government, the ministers in the state, or reason in the individual, to have a more long term, a more holistic view, and to think of the whole, to not let minor goals, minor subordinated purposes defeat one another, but rather to keep in mind the actual, the highest purpose that we have, and to keep in mind that everything else should be a means to that highest purpose. And that, of course, would mean that the government needs wisdom. I already gave a lecture what is wisdom to Kant, and basically it's this. You are a fool, according to Kant, if you sacrifice the whole for a part. So if you are so preoccupied with a minor purpose you have that you thereby sacrifice the higher purpose, while wisdom means keeping your eye on the highest purpose and treating everything in accordance with that higher purpose, as a means to that higher purpose. So a good government should not simply be the servant or the slave of the ruler, always trying to blindly follow his orders and blindly enact them, but rather a good government should be independent and should try to interpret the orders of the ruler in a manner so that they are harmless, or should try to restrict the will of the ruler to that which is in accordance with reason. And if necessary, a good government even needs to not execute certain commands by the ruler. A good government needs to sort of talk the ruler out of certain commands. However, for Kant, it's important that the government should not be at war with the ruler. The government should not seek open confrontation. The government should be a bit more prudent and diplomatic about it, because that's also what prudence means to Kant, right? I discussed it in the lecture on the imperatives. To him, prudence can be private prudence, which is about your happiness, using reason to become happy. But prudence to him also can mean world prudence, which is mainly about how to deal with other people, how to get people, despite them being free beings, so they cannot be as easily manipulated as objects that are simply under the laws of nature, so where you can simply apply technology. But still, if you have this world prudence, you can deal with people, and you know how you need to talk to people and so on, and you can get people on your side, or you can get people to do what you want. And this world prudence in dealing with their ruler is what good governors need. So let's say the minister dealing with his king, with some absolute monarch in Kant's days. If the king says, I want a big fleet, the minister should not simply say, no, I refuse to follow this command, and this is a stupid command, and there's not enough money for that. That would probably just make the king mad. Rather, a prudent minister would maybe say, yes, your majesty, as you wish, your majesty, it will be done, your majesty. I will immediately close down the opera and fire your cooks. And then the king will go, what? Why? That wasn't my order. My order was that I wanted a fleet. And then the minister can go on and say, yes, sure. And that's exactly what I will do. And to free the money for the fleet, I will close down the opera. And then the king might say, but I want to keep going to my opera and I want to keep my cooks. And so then the minister can maybe say, oh, in that case, your majesty, might I propose these reforms to our economy, to our trade, that might help us gain more money. And with this additional money, we could start some sort of social program to help the poor. And that will, I promise, that will give you a lot more prestige and a bigger reputation than the king of the neighboring kingdom, who just wastes his money on new palaces and fleets and so on. And so the prudent minister would have sort of manipulated his king into changing his will, right? And the same would be true in the household. Again, you have to think of marriage as it was in Kant's day. And here, when the wife demands something, says, "I want new earrings," the good husband will not seek open confrontation. He will not say, "No, woman, stop having so many demands. We don't have the money for that. I cannot spend money for that." Because then he will lead a very unhappy married life. But rather, the good husband will say, yes, honey, as you wish, honey. But he will probably be able to somehow make her forget it, somehow make her change her wishes, somehow get her something else that is cheaper, but that she's so happy with that she forgets her former wish or whatever, right? I mean, sometimes you even just have to postpone things. The minister, when the king wishes for a new palace, can maybe say, yes, yes, it will be done. And then when the king asks again a year later, the minister can say, yes, I'm talking to the architects. They are making their designs now. And then maybe a year or two later, the king has forgotten it and has a new project. Whatever. And the point is that the good government is prudent, is even wise, and knows how to deal with its ruler. Kant likes to quote the Latin saying, mundus regitur opinionibus. So the world is governed by opinions. So he would say that it is most prudent through govern through giving those you govern a certain opinion, namely an opinion that they are truly in charge, because no one likes feeling ruled. And if people feel ruled, they will just rebel. So Kant says even the prudent king, even though he may have absolute power, he will try to make the people feel as if they are free. And likewise, Kant would say the prudent wife will make her husband feel as if he is in charge, he is the man, but in truth, she is the one who actually is in charge. Well, that is the distinction that Kant makes between ruling and governing, and I said that this distinction is very important, very helpful. Um, for one, I think it helps understanding Kant himself better, and not just his philosophy of right or his political philosophy. For example, through this we can better understand his moral philosophy, because many people misunderstand Kant as if Kant stands for some sort of asceticism, some sort of strict morality that takes all joy out of life because it is so pedantic, because all that matters is doing your duty and not following your senses. Um, but again, Kant says the senses may rule, that is fine. It's just that reason should govern. He's not saying that reason should rule. He's not saying that reason should be a despot and tyrant that restricts the senses. Um, he's not saying that we cannot follow our sensual desires. Indeed, that would be what Kant calls the virtue of monks, or an ethica morose, and which he very strongly rejects. He's just saying reason should govern the desires of the senses. So, as I already said, sure, I can desire food, I can desire sex, and I can actually get those things, but I should do it within the restriction of the moral law. I should not steal or rape for it. But it's not just the understanding of Kant's own philosophy where this distinction is helpful. Um, I think it can be applied to many parts of life, because many problems in this world, and even in daily life, arise simply from the fact that unaufkläred people tend to want to simply rule. Um, that is, they want to be in control. They want to rule like a despot, like a tyrant, instead of trying to govern, which of course is harder because it is a real art, because it requires power of judgment, it requires wisdom, so it requires some measure of Aufklärung. Take as one example how you move, how you deal with your own body. Um, this is something I got from my dad. Um, Indeed, it is my dad who pointed me first at this distinction Kant makes between governing and ruling. As I already said, many people seem to overlook it. Even people who certainly aren't dumb, even someone like Hannah Arendt, seems to not have paid too much mind to the scattered remarks of Kant's. Maybe I too would have overlooked it and would not give this specific lecture now if it wasn't for my dad when he read Kant picking up on this and then pointing it out to me. But my dad found this very helpful for his own work as a physiotherapist, because what you should do with your body is you should govern it, but you should not try to rule it. So people can sit, for example, but they should listen to their body, and they should feel their body signals. So when the body says it's too much, this is getting uncomfortable, I need a change of position, or maybe I even need to get up for a bit, walk around a little bit, then they should listen. Or likewise, people can walk, but often they force their body to walk a certain way, Maybe they are stressed, maybe they are in a hurry, they force themselves to walk extra fast, and again, they don't listen to their body's signals. Maybe they stomp too much, and doing that for years and years, they ruin their body till eventually they can't walk properly anymore. Instead, as I say, they should govern it. Another area where this distinction can be applied is when you deal with children. I think that so Kant himself does not apply this distinction here. He does have some things to say about pedagogy, and I will discuss this at the very end of my Kant lectures when I get to his anthropology. He himself does not explicitly apply the distinction of ruling and governing, but I think just as he says in a household the wife must be the ruler and the husband the governor, uh, just like that you should also treat your children. The children should be the rulers at home, but of course the parents should govern them. The issue is that way too often parents don't want to bother governing their children, but rather they try to directly rule them. And that leads to conflicts, right? Even in the smallest matters. The child wants some chocolate or some ice cream, and the parents say no, or the child finds a stone on the street that it likes and wants to take it home, and the parents say no, or the child doesn't want to wear its jacket or gloves when it's winter, and the parents say you have to, and so on and so on. And the child will probably ask why, and the only reply it will get is because I say so, or because I'm your mother, which you could translate as because I am the ruler. So because I am the one in charge, and what I say goes, and I don't have to justify myself, I don't have to give any reason for that. And here I will remind you, I discussed this in my lecture on what is reason to Kant, that Kant says reason is the faculty of justification. So being reasonable means being able to justify your opinions and also your actions. So to quite literally give a reason. Why am I doing that? And most people are not capable of doing that most of the time, because most people act completely irrationally. They follow their desires and whims, or they function like programmed robots, just doing what everyone else is doing mindlessly without thinking about it, which is very true for parents. I mean, most of the parenting is just done according to cliches. Most of the parenting is just people doing what they see other parents in real life or in movies doing, because that's what everyone does, right? Like when the child says, I want chocolate, and then the mother says, no, you already had chocolate. There is no reason for this. It's not that she really thought this through. It's just that she thinks this is what you do as a good mother. You don't spoil your child, you don't indulge its every wish, and you don't let it have unhealthy sweets all the time. This is what you do, this is what all the mothers do. Most people, and especially most parents, could not justify, that is, could not give reasons for their actions. And so when the child asks them to justify, when the child demands a reason, and I mean especially the child should get a reason. It is our job to cultivate the reason of the child. It is our job to get the child used to doing what is rational, so to think about what should be done and then follow a rational insight, it is not our job to instead train the child to just follow arbitrary, unjustified commands. Because one day the child will grow up and we will have trained a subject for a despotic state, but we will not have raised a proper, aufklärt human being that can lead itself through its own reason. So when the child demands some sort of justification, some sort of reason, parents refuse to do it and basically just say, I'm the dictator, I don't need, you are just a stupid little child, I don't need to give you a reason. Which is what they are saying when they say, because I'm your mother, or because I'm in charge, or whatever, or because this is what I say. And such things, which happen many thousands of times every single day in many thousands of households, just create unnecessary conflict. They make the child unhappy, but they also make the parents unhappy because this is stressful, right? The child will get moody, the child will stomp its feet, the child will cry, and this is no fun for the parents either. So what should be done is governing the child. And again, the world is governed through opinions, Kant says. Give the ones you govern the opinion, the illusion at least, of being in charge. So don't seek confrontation. Don't raise your child with no's, always saying, no, no, you mustn't, no, I don't allow. Rather, try to be a bit more prudent about that. I just have to think of a friend of mine who has children, and I remember one day we were outside, we were walking in nature, and the children, as children are wont to do, they kept discovering sticks on the ground that they liked because they had some particular shape that the children found interesting or funny. And they collected these sticks and wanted to take them with them. And every few meters they discovered a new stick they liked, and they would probably have taken half a forest home. Now, a normal German mother would have probably said, no, leave that here because I say so. I don't want you to take that home, that's dirty, or we don't have space, I don't want it in our house. And then the child would have cried and there would have been a lot of stress. But I was quite fascinated with my friend, who was always friendly and smiling and accommodating and saying yes. But at the same time, without creating any conflict with her children, managed to, to not take any of the sticks home. Like she would manage to put the children's attention to something else so that they would forget that one stick and leave it on the ground after a meter or something. Because, I mean, again, the ruling happens according to mere fancies and whims. It's not that every command the ruler gives is really dear and important to him. It's really his true will. So the child may just see that stick. Its attention falls onto that stick. And in that very moment, when it's focused on the stick, it likes the shape of the stick. But I mean, it's not like it really needs this stick. Like it really plans to do anything with the stick. So just as quickly as its attention fixated on the stick, it may also wander somewhere else again. And that's what the children's mother, what my friend managed to do, always changing the children's attention, always making sure they left the sticks by themselves without even thinking about it much. And this is something you can do, which will lead to much less conflict. But of course, this does require one thing, and that is that you give yourself and also the children time. This is an important part of my dad's philosophy, granting both yourself and others time and space. I cannot get into that here without digressing, because this is a Kant lecture, not a lecture on my dad. And Kant himself does not reflect on the condition of the possibility of governing. He says what governing is, but not what is required to be able to govern. But I would say, if we do ask what is the condition of the possibility of governing, then it would be granting yourself time. If you're in a hurry, if you are stressed, then all you can do is try to control, is try to give orders. In other words, is trying to rule, is trying to be a dictator. You cannot be prudent, you cannot be diplomatic, you cannot think about the best way to execute an order or to deal with an order if you don't have time. So that's the main issue, right? So the parents, for example, with their children, they don't grant themselves or the children time. So in the morning, they want to bring the children to daycare before they go to work, and then if the child doesn't want to get dressed quickly enough, doesn't want to dress with its jacket, it gets stressful for the parents, and the parents start giving orders, and the child starts to cry, which only creates more stress. This is something that in our household never happened, simply because my dad always made sure there was time. So maybe he wouldn't leave the house just 10 minutes before he wanted to drop me off at daycare, but he would already start getting ready half an hour earlier, so that if I was slow one particular day, or if I had some whims coming up, that didn't create stress for him. But of course, in our highly stressed society, in our society where everyone is constantly busy and constantly working on their own burnout, that is something that many people cannot do. But anyways, let's get back to Kant. It should be very much obvious that today, in the states we have today, there is not really much governing happening. And that is one of our main issues. Again, the sovereign is the one ultimately in charge to Kant, is the one who, be it directly or through his representative, gives the law. So the sovereign is the ruler, but he should not be the governor if you have proper division of powers. And this was true in Kant's day, when the sovereign was an absolute monarch. The monarch should not do the day-to-day governing, and his governors, his ministers, they should be able to deal with their monarch, and maybe with the mindless whims or the thoughtless commands that he comes up with. But nowadays, of course, we have democracy. So the sovereign is the people. This does not mean that this issue is simply solved and off the table, but rather it still is true that the government should govern. And that's not what's happening. Rather, our politicians seem to be afraid of governing. They seem to be afraid of their sovereign, the people, and they present themselves to the people as mere servants, ready to fulfill each stupid wish that the people may have. This, of course, is populism. So I will stress that we hear a lot about populism from the left or populism from the right. I will stress all our politicians, all our parties, more or less, that we have nowadays are populist. There's also such a thing as a populism of the center. Just because it's centrist doesn't mean it's necessarily less populist. The populist is the one who does not want to govern, but rather who promises the people, the populace, the sovereign, that he will simply serve them and simply fulfill their wishes. So he is akin to the politician or minister in the monarchy who's just a bootlicker and a sycophant to his monarch, and who never dares to disagree with him or to govern by himself, but rather who, if anything, manipulates the monarchs through acting as if he simply fulfills his wishes. And this is the issue we have nowadays. Of course, I'm not saying that the government should assume rulership, should try to rule by itself and against the people. No, the people, the sovereign, can be the ruler, but it should be governed. So it's one thing if the people, for example, demands security, says we want to live a protected and secure life. That is fine. But now the people can think, and that's what many people think nowadays here, the people can think that this security requires getting rid of all immigrants, of all refugees, but that doesn't mean it's true. I mean, obviously it's not true. We have other problems. I think that, so speaking here from the German perspective, our security is threatened much more by great powers like Moscow or like the USA, who don't take Europe seriously and to want to turn Europe into their vessels and spheres of interests. Or our security is much more threatened by the climate crisis, or even within the country. Uh, our security is much more threatened by our unrestricted traffic. Every day there are 8 people in Germany dying in traffic accidents. You don't have 8 people a day dying because they got stabbed by some refugee. Believe me, if that was the case, we would know about it here in Germany because all the racists wouldn't stop screaming about it. So the politicians, the government, could take up the people's wish for security, and they could try to work on actual security. And of course, they would also have to address the matter of immigrants. They could try to work for better integration, for normal people not feeling like they are being left alone with these strangers coming into their country, but rather feeling like things are actually taken care of, like these strangers are given a place here, like their, so the people who already live here, like their place is not being taken away, they are not being replaced. The government would also have to work on making sure the actual security and the perceived security align better. Because after all, the actual security is very high here in Germany. It's a very secure country. And yet still you have people who feel like they are not secure. Even to the degree I've heard such stories. There are people that say, "Oh, I don't leave my house anymore if I can avoid it. I don't feel secure going onto the street," when they live in some quiet suburb where nothing has happened in the past 100 years or so. So that's something the government would have to work on. But of course, unaufklärt people hate work. They hate anything difficult. They hate anything that would require thinking and making your own judgments. So it's much easier to just promise the people, oh, you feel insecure because of immigrants? Well, we will deport them all, and we will erect a wall and not let anyone in. And likewise, the people may utter the wish for keeping their wealth and their welfare. Well, that doesn't mean that politics should not deal with the climate crisis, because assumedly the people also wish for a future. They probably also want to keep their welfare for more than the next 5 or 10 years. And maybe they even want a future for their children. So they might be so mindless, so thoughtless, so unaufklärt that they pit one interest they have against the other. But the politicians should not go with that. The politicians should think a little further and should take care of the climate also, and should make sure that people understand, should explain to the people that this is actually what is needed for their security and their welfare in the midterm and the long term. And of course, they can go about that in a prudent manner. They don't have to take care of the climate in a way that just from one day to the next makes everyone poor and ruins the economy. They can go about it prudently. But they should not just be ruled by the people's fears and just promise, oh, don't worry, we won't make even the slightest changes to your everyday life. We will not take your cars. We will not change how we produce our energy. You will not feel any changes until, of course, you do feel them, because the climate crisis really hits you. I mean, not that it doesn't already. We have already experienced droughts here in the past years. We have had a big flood that killed like 150 people, and the politicians seem to just promise more and more of that because they don't want to take care of the climate, because they fear the people so much, because they are so populist and they just want to please the momentary whims of the people. So that's the issue nowadays. The politicians are afraid of, and they are also incapable of, I mean, even if they wanted to, they wouldn't know how to, governing. And the way we understand democracy now is as the dictatorship of the people. I mean, that's why democracy is so popular, right? I mean, pretty much everyone nowadays talks about democracy and about being for democracy, and even the right-wingers will say that they are the true Democrats, that in fact they are for more democracy, and that it is the leftists that ruin democracy. Well, why is that the case? Why would democracy be so popular when the people are unaufklärt? If the majority of people are unaufklärt, whatever is popular cannot be popular for aufklärt reasons, right? That's simple logics. So why then is democracy so popular? Not because it's understood to be less despotic, less of a dictatorship, but rather because what many people understand by democracy is simply another sort of dictatorship, where there's not one dictator and I'm amongst his subjects, but rather where I can be my own dictator, even at least in a small way. I can take part in the dictatorship if I find a majority that wants to dictate in a similar way as I. I mean, that's what especially those right-wingers mean when they talk of democracy, right? When they say we are the people, they want a dictatorship of their whims. They want a dictatorship of their desires. They want a dictatorship of the majority over what is maybe the minority. So they want to rule directly without there being any government. And against this, I think we should study Kant, and we should remember that democracy, if you translate it directly from the Greek, means the rule of the people. It does not mean the government of the people. So I would say, sure, let's have democracy, that's fine. The people can be the sovereign instead of some absolute monarch. But just like that monarch should not govern himself, but rather he should be governed by his ministers, so the people, while being the ruler, should not be just the ruler without there being a governor. There should be a proper government, and that's what we are lacking. And this, to conclude this, this leads me to the observation that nowadays, since people are not used to think in principles, people are used to start off with experience, to just look around, what do we find in the world, what happens to exist, and what do our eyes happen to fall upon, and then maybe they reflect about these things and conditions that they find, but they don't start thinking from rational principles. And this is true not just for the lay people, this is true also for the experts, this is true for the politologists, who, after all, nowadays are mostly sociologists that focus on political matters. They are not philosophers of right. And so, unfortunately, in our days, the political thinking, the concepts that we have of politics, are very simple, if not downright primitive. And there have been other times in human history, like Kant's time, the 18th century, but also like the time of the ancient Greeks, where political thinking was much more developed and much more sophisticated. Because nowadays, when the question is discussed, how should a state be run, then usually in the public debate, in people's thinking, even in what you're taught at school, it seems as if there are only two possibilities, as if there's a simple dichotomy. There's only democracy and there's dictatorship. And by democracy, people understand everything that they consider to be good without differentiating. So you will have people saying, oh, democracy involves the rule of law, democracy involves the division of powers, which, of course, both of these things have nothing to do with democracy. I mean, the old Athenians had democracy, and there was no such thing as division of powers or rule of law. Everyone could come together, and together they could choose to banish this one person that they didn't like. Nothing here has anything to do with rule of law, but still it is democratic. So what I mean by this is that nowadays the word democracy is used to mean much more than what it actually means. What it actually means is rule by the people. Now, the question who rules is not the only question we can ask to a state. But we often act nowadays if democracy alone includes everything good, everything that should be there. So we confuse democracy with what Kant would probably call a republic. And then on the other hand, you have dictatorship, by which people usually just understand, okay, the rule of one person. And here, the very word used betrays how superficial and how lacking any proper orientation our current political thinking is. Because the word dictatorship comes from the ancient Romans, and it meant something different. The dictatorship was a specific institution in Roman law, where if there was a crisis, if there was a special emergency situation, the normal constitution of government and the normal divisions of power would be put aside, and one person, the dictator, would be given special powers for a limited time. Which, by the way, is something that Kant also, if we go by some note of his, seems to have approved of. He also seems to have thought that maybe in certain emergency situations it could be necessary or a good thing to have a dictator for a short while. Of course, this is something that could be discussed and, of course, also criticized. Of course, a big issue with that is how do we make sure that the dictator really does only stay dictator for a short while and doesn't just keep his powers. After all, that's exactly what eventually happened in Rome, right? With Caesar becoming dictator for life and then the Republic ending. But be that as it may, the person we call dictator nowadays is not someone who just is empowered for a short while because of some emergency. So instead of speaking of dictatorship, it would be more correct to either speak of autocracy, if we want to look at the aspect of who rules, and if we want to emphasize that it is rulership by only one person, not by the people, as in democracy. Or we could call it despotism if we want to look more at how the state is governed, and if we want to emphasize more that it is a unjust and illegitimate form of government. But anyways, my point is that nowadays there's only this distinction between democracy, which somehow also is meant to include rule of law and division of powers and checks and balances, and dictatorship, which means, okay, one guy is in charge and it's unjust. And this also means that it is almost impossible to have proper discussions on this matter. Because it means that if you criticize the current democracy, not even necessarily democracy as such, because that's also another issue, right? That when people nowadays use the word democracy, most of the time they mean specifically this kind of party-based, vote-based, parliamentary democracy according to the English model that we nowadays have in pretty much all the countries that are considered democratic. But of course, that's not the only possible form of democracy. Democracy could also mean more direct democracy by the people. Democracy could also mean a council system. Democracy could also mean that instead of elections, you use lots. And I don't want to discuss here which of those would be better or worse than what we currently have. That's not the point. The point is just that people are nowadays often very lacking in fantasy and imagination, and that they are often very limited in their thoughts, in their imagination. But the point is, you can often not have a proper discussion because since people think in this simple dichotomy, they think if you criticize the democracy we have, then automatically you must be on the other side, on the side of dictatorship. And indeed, in the public discourse, people also often get accused of being anti-democratic. So let's say someone like climate activists, right? If they glue themselves to the street, or if they say we don't have time, or we can't compromise with nature, then they are accused of being undemocratic, which might or might not be true. But the problem is that the implication is, if they are undemocratic, then they must be for dictatorship, they must be for oppression, they must be for injustice, because this is taken to be the only alternative to democracy there is. Well, Kant's political thinking is a bit more sophisticated, because since he differentiates between ruling and governing, to him there's also a difference between what he calls the form of the state, or the form of rulership, and the form of government. The former, the form of the state, concerns the constitution of the state and concerns the question, who is the ruler? So by form of the state or form of rulership, Kant means basically what usually nowadays is called the form of government. And here, Kant says there are three possibilities, the three classical possibilities that already the Greeks have. And why Kant doesn't outright say so, I would say that this follows from his table of categories. I already gave a lecture on the table of categories where I explained that. To Kant, there are these 12 basic categories of our thinking. All thinking has to happen within these 12 categories, and three of them are concerned with quantity. And they are the three categories of unity, plurality, and totality. So any quantity you think, you either think of one or many or all. And I think it is obvious that this fits with the three types of rulership. So either you have one ruler in autocracy, be it a good monarchy or a bad tyranny, or you have many rulers in an aristocracy or in an oligarchy, or everyone is the ruler in democracy. And that is the form of state. Again, that concerns the constitution as such. So this is about who is the boss, who makes the laws. But then, along with this form of the state or of rulership, there's also the form of government. And here Kant says there are two possibilities, namely a republican government or a despotic government. And this is more about how the constitution or how the laws are executed, namely how the state is actually governed. Is it being governed in a just or in an unjust manner? And to Kant, the point is that which we take to be so important nowadays, the form of state, we think that there must be democracy, that is the only just form of state, the only just form of rulership. To Kant, that is secondary. He might have preferred democracy, some sort of system of representation of the people, but that's not the most important question to him. What is more important is, how is the state governed, not by whom is it ruled. And Kant would say that, at least hypothetically, any of the three forms of rulerships can go with any of the two forms of government. So he would say that you can have a republican autocracy. So you can have one ruler, one monarch, but still a government in a republican manner. And indeed, Kant believed this to be the case in his own days in Prussia under Frederick II, Frederick the Great, a king that Kant greatly admired, mostly for putting an end to censorship, especially on religious matters. So for allowing people to freely discuss their ideas, and freely criticize the current state of affairs. So therefore, Kant said, there is a monarchy, there's rulership of one, but it is still in a republican, in a just and free manner. And this to him is more important. To him, the form of state is about the matter, the content of the state, but a form of government is about the form of the state. To him, the form of government is about the actual purpose of the state. Is the purpose in the republic the actual freedom and justice? Or is the purpose in despotism happiness? Be it the happiness of just a ruler, if the ruler is some tyrant who maybe enslaves the people for his own gain, or even the happiness of the people, which is still despotic to Kant, if the ruler tries to just enforce happiness. So that's what matters. The government is about the purpose, and the form of rulership is just about the means to get to that purpose. So through what means? Through maybe one king, or through maybe democratic rule by the people, do we best get to the purpose of the republic, the purpose of freedom and justice? And again, it might very well be that we say, okay, it is easier for a democracy to be republican, so this is a better means to reach that purpose, while in a monarchy there's a greater danger of missing that purpose, of the monarch turning into a despot. That might be, but still the rulership is only important as a means to an end. It is not an end in itself. It's not that democracy in itself is good, rather the republic in itself is good. But what precisely that means, the republic and the despotic state, what precisely the difference there is, that I want to keep for an upcoming lecture. Here it was just important for me to first introduce the difference between ruling and governing, between giving the command and then on the other hand executing it, or even thinking through if that really is a good command that should be executed in that manner. And I wanted to stress how important that distinction is, not just to better understand Kant, to better understand the upcoming distinction between despotism and republic, but also in other areas, even areas that Kant himself did not discuss, like how do I deal with my body, how do I deal with my children, where it is helpful to not try to rule, to be a despotic tyrant, but rather to try to govern in a prudent and wise manner. That's it for now. With this as a fundament, I will go on in the upcoming lectures to discuss what Kant has to say about what is a republic, and how to make sure that we have a republic and that we also keep living in a republic and it doesn't turn despotic. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Cenk Kubilay Altu, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Spendierhosenträger, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.